Some classrooms can feel like obstacle courses. The syllabus is a maze, the unwritten rules are in another language, and the only map is labeled office hours, whatever that means. But in others, the path is clear, the doors are open, and everyone knows they belong. Today, we're talking about building accessible classrooms. And no, we're not just talking about ramps or captions, though those do matter. We're talking about the small shifts, the flexible paths, and the you can actually sit with us energy that make learning possible for every student. Welcome back to the What and Who of EDU, where we bring you insights from the leading educators, researchers, and innovators who are shaping the future of teaching and learning. On our podcast, we share real-world classroom strategies that help you create a more impactful and effective learning environment. I'm your host, Marissa Bluestone, and today we've got 10 ways instructors are making their classroom more accessible. And if you'd like to learn more about our featured educators, their bios are there for you in the show notes. For now, let's ditch those steep steps and go open some doors. We're going to kick it off with what I think is the most important point, because it's all too easy to talk about accessibility like it's extra credit, something that sits squarely in the if I have time section of teaching. But Jennifer Duncan, Associate Professor of English at Georgia State University's Perimeter College, knows better, and she has a different take. What's good for one is good for all, which is our first tip.
Good teaching strategies are good teaching strategies for everybody. So something simple like turning on closed captioning in a video I create, I may initially have thought of that as only students who have hearing issues will want that. But what I find is some students like to be able to see that, or some students may be watching on the train and need to put in their earphones or can't have sound, and that's going to help them. If I add tags to an image, that's going to help somebody who may have had to walk out of the room, and now I've described that image for them in another way. And the same thing with including lots of different types of assignments. So instead of just delivering my content via a video or text on a page, if I can find multiple ways to deliver that content, then I will hit multiple students at what works for them. So I'm not an expert on the universal design for learning in any way, but I love the cartoon that they often use in those workshops where it shows a bunch of people standing outside of a house. It's snowing, and the person says, as soon as I clear the steps, I'll handle the handicapped ramp. And the person says, but if you clear the ramp, everybody can walk up it. So I try to think of my teaching from that. If I clear the ramp, then that makes it better for everybody, not just a student with a particular accommodation need.
She's cracked the accessibility code by making it about everyone, not just students with a letter from the disability office. It's like that cartoon she mentioned. If we're building the ramp as the front steps, then everyone can use it and no one's left outside. Okay, we know that accessibility is foundational, but what happens when you want to build that ramp and don't know how to pour, let alone get, the concrete? That's where Kendra Thomas, Associate Professor of Psychology at Hope College, comes in, and she brings us our second tip. A reminder that you don't have to know everything, just where to find the right resources for your students. Some of those places where you can get extra support, they might surprise you.
My answer for this one's going to sound like a plug because I do find that service from, from Macmillan Learning specifically, I find that tool to be incredibly effective. I don't think that I have gotten very much in my training other than like empathy and perspective taking like that. Those are skills that I can bring from a professional perspective, but like the contrast in colors necessary to be able to feed into a software. And there's a huge amount of technicality in accessibility that requires things that I frankly don't know and haven't been prepared for, right? And so I find that those set of resources that comes with a textbook have been incredibly helpful because some colleges offer more than others. And so there's usually, an office of accessibility, but I have found that having that embedded in the curriculum really takes some of the pressure off because I know that that's been met. It's a really complex field. And the more I learn about it, the more daunting it feels. And it's really helpful to have like a companion.
Kendra calls out the elephant in the room. Too many instructors are missing key intel when it comes to real accessibility. Her honesty is like admitting you can't fix your car's transmission just because you care about transportation. Just make sure you have a good mechanic on speed dial, or in this case, your Macmillan Learning sales rep. For Dr. Kristen Monroe, assistant professor of chemistry, accessibility is a verb. She doesn't need to retrofit accommodations because she builds for variability straight from the start, which is our third tip. Dr. Monroe teaches neurodivergent students at Landmark College and knows just how important it is to bake accessibility right into the recipe, or in one student's case, the chemical reaction.
I started at Landmark in 2020 during the pandemic, and I was warned that I would have to have flexible deadlines. I had no idea the level that that would actually be true. And so I found that doing a lot of work during class and using active learning strategies can be essential to help students' grades accurately reflect their content knowledge. It is so frustrating to me as an instructor when I know a student knows things, but because they struggle with executive function challenges and work completion, especially outside the classroom, their grade is not a reflection of their content knowledge. And I have noticed that when I look at students' grades from other classes, I'll have a student that has a 60 in my class and they'll have a 20 or an 8 in another class. And when a student looks at a 20 or an 8, they just don't have any hope of passing that class, right? But even though a 60 isn't a great grade, they at least have hope that if they put in a little bit more effort or change their strategies, then they could bring that grade up.
But it's about more than flexibility with deadlines. She also lets students choose their own path.
I also use flexibility and personalized learning. No, I get students that come in with a variety of different skills and they're all neurodivergent. So it's important for me to allow them to take advantage of the learning strategy that works best for them rather than kind of dictating what I think is going to work for them. I once had a student who wrote a chemical reaction for how to be successful in my class. And when I looked at it, it was just do all of the things that have been assigned. But what was really cool about it, it's not order dependent. So a student can choose to watch a video before or after class. And if it works better for them to watch the video after class, then by all means, do what works for you. I tell my students, I can't tell you how you learn best. You have to plug in your learning style to the content that I present to you. And providing the flexibility to do that is really important. And I would also say that giving students clear learning objectives to understand the purpose of what they're doing. One of the things that I do is I have videos that I say supplement the reading assignments, but let's face it, a lot of students aren't reading. So it's really just a standalone. But when a student is struggling with the content in the videos, then I say, oh, look, here's a supplementary reading assignment that I gave that complements that. And I basically tell the student, I don't care how you learn the content, but if you're struggling with the video, look back at the reading assignment and try to find that content in the reading assignment. And you might find that it actually works better to do the reading and then answer the questions in the video. And my hope is that by giving them those options, they start to continue to work on finding the strategies that work best for them.
Dr. Monroe reminds us that when you build flexibility into the course from day one, you're not lowering the bar, you are removing the static so that students can actually hear the music. But accessibility isn't just about materials. It's also about spotting the invisible rules of higher ed and tossing out that secret handshake, especially for first-generation students or students who are coming back to college later in life. Our fourth tip is from Dr. Eric Ching, professor in residence in economics at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. who makes the first weeks feel easy enough so that every student knows that they're invited in.
Making my classroom accessible to students is very important because at my university, over half of our students are first generation or non-traditional college students. These include students who are their first in their families to attend college, as well as older students returning to school to acquire new skills. My university is also very culturally diverse, and therefore making the classroom accessible and inclusive ensures that no one feels left out because of unfamiliarity with the jargon or campus culture that we often take for granted. For example, many students do not truly understand the purpose of a professor's office hours. They might feel intimidated to go. Therefore, the first 2 weeks of class, I don't have office hours. Instead, I offer meet and greet sessions where I encourage my students to stop by and say hello for a few seconds. No questions or preparations needed. Just come by and introduce yourself so I can put a name to a face. And then from there, students will often feel much more comfortable seeking help in the course. Additionally, in every class, I keep a live online poll open, allowing students to share anonymous comments and questions, which I view privately on a separate monitor. If a student is confused about a topic or has a question that they want to ask without raising their hand, there's an easy way to do that using their phone to ask anonymously.
Office hours can sound a lot like detention to students who've never navigated academic culture. It's like inviting someone to a networking event versus asking them to come grab coffee. Same goal, but completely different emotional baggage. Okay, we threw out the secret handshake. We found ways to make class less intimidating. And now we take that idea even further by making small shifts in language and space that remind students that they belong here. Dr. Daniel Look, the Charles A. Dana Professor of Mathematics at St. Lawrence University, explains why the words we use are so important in our fifth tip.
I mean, a couple of things that I consider small, but I don't know if the students do. So I'm a first generation college student, and I know the kind of struggles with terminology and code switching that you have as a first generation student. And so a few years ago, I had a student mention to me that they didn't know what office hours were. They kind of thought that was the time when I was doing office work and they shouldn't come by. And then a colleague of mine had new hire from a few years ago, was a former student of mine, Kevin Ang. He started calling them student hours and holding them in a public space. And so that's now what I do. And several of us in the department do this. I have found that those who need to come to student hours most are more likely to come under this situation. They're not coming into a realm where they are at a distinct power, right? They're not coming into your office, which is very intimidating. It's called student hours, so they know it's for them. And you kind of avoid that line out your door because now I'm in a larger space. So if there are 10 people there, they can all hear the answer to what I'm discussing with a particular student. And then often it becomes a conversation that I then say, okay, you all are having this conversation. I'm going to help this other student in this other class and then come back and check on you. And that, of course, creates a sense of community, which obviously helps with belonging and accessibility. Others are just making small shifts. Another colleague of mine never says, what questions do you have when kind of wrapping up and getting ready to move? Rather, they say, what would you like to know more about? Or is there anything you'd like to know more about? And that's a small shift, but it puts you in a position of power asking the question. Like all of a sudden, I'm curious, not uninformed, right? I'm curious about it, but I'm not the student who just didn't get it. And I think that also can help students who are nervous about fitting in ask these questions.
Dan's changes are deceptively simple, using student hours instead of office hours, asking, what do you want to know more about, instead of what questions do you have? But they reframe the whole interaction. It's the difference between a cold call and a warm invitation, and who doesn't want more students to RSVP yes? Some people hear flexible and think that means the standards are going out the door. But Mary Gurley, professor of psychology at Gaston College, knows better. Tip 6 is a 3-part playbook for accessibility. Start with the basics, flex when life happens, and use structures that work for everyone.
There's the area of making sure that all your materials in any class that you teach are accessible, and making sure in terms of, screen readers, hearing impaired all those things, ADA stuff, right? So that's one section of accessibility to me in my brain. And I want to make sure that everything in my class is set up for students who need any type of accessibility, ADA type stuff. They're going to make it, like they're going to be successful. So that's definitely a hurdle that you need to make sure you understand. And if you are a new instructor, you need to make sure that you know that there are things at your college and resources for your students and for yourself with your learning distance people, your distance learning people, your tech people that are going to help you make sure all that stuff is in place.
Next, she tackles the tricky question of deadlines, post-pandemic style.
Deadlines, I feel like became this like really big headache during the pandemic. And then after the pandemic, it was like, I think all the instructors kind of went through this thing like, you do eventually have to turn stuff in. So I think I've kind of crossed that bridge now. I've turned that corner. I mean, I've got some pretty strict deadlines in place and they're going to stay there. But I do think that it's really important to be flexible in circumstances. I feel like that's closer to real life. I feel like that helps students. I do think there's going to be some students who you're probably never going to be able to help. And you will see that highlighted in the way that you maybe give them extensions a couple times and it never works out for them. And that's okay. It's fine to be part of that story for that student. It doesn't mean that you have to run your entire class like that. But I do think you need to pay attention to specific circumstances and specific situations.
And finally, she relies on a collaborative learning model that builds in accessibility from the ground up.
I do use the pedagogy team-based learning. I have yet to see it come up against a situation that it can't handle. And what I mean by that is like when we have a deaf student or a blind student in the class, they just seamlessly fit into the paradigm, like the way that the team is set up. They'll have an interpreter or they'll have an assistant with them. So I feel like team-based learning is really robust in the way that it kind of is able to accommodate any type of accommodation that's needed.
Mary blends non-negotiable structure with targeted flexibility, and she backs it all up with a learning model that expects differences. She's basically saying life happens isn't an excuse. It's a design principle for humans. The kinds whose dogs sometimes eat their homework. Some students learn best by watching, others by doing, others by debating you into the ground. Dr. Erica Martinez, an economics professor of instruction at the University of South Florida, uses Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, to make sure students know that there's more than one way to demonstrate mastery. And that's her 7th tip, to let students show what they know, their way.
I use Universal Design for Learning principles and aim to create flexible learning environments by providing multiple ways for students to access information and engage with the content and demonstrate their understanding. And this way, I try to effectively accommodate diverse learning needs and abilities of different learners. To that end, I offer multiple ways for students to engage with the content. I have videos that they can access outside of the classroom. Some classes I use interactive simulations. We have debates in some of my classes, presentations, chalk and talk I use, and I'm constantly engaging students in group work as well as individual work, case studies. Depends on the class that I'm teaching, but I try to use and incorporate many different approaches, many different ways that they can demonstrate their proficiency in my classroom, and to make sure that my materials are always ADA compliant, screen reader friendly. I allow for flexible dates and deadlines for students facing accessibility challenges, and really try to accommodate diverse needs for my students.
Erica doesn't just accommodate, she anticipates. It's important to build different ways for students to engage with their learning, but what happens when illness, anxiety, or family emergencies pop up? Life happens. Jennifer Ripley Stickle, teaching professor in the Department of Biology at the University of West Virginia, makes sure those reasons don't turn into roadblocks by keeping her course open and accessible 24/7, which is our 8th tip.
The two most dominant tools that I use to make my classroom accessible is that I have created these things called lightboard videos. And lightboard videos are a piece of plexiglass in front of me that has an LED strip around it, and it illuminates the clear plexiglass. And then I take fluorescent expo markers, whiteboard markers, and write on them and record me lecturing. So it's this really dynamic board that I'm on. Like I'm standing behind it, I'm kind of writing on my face or around me in these fluorescent lights. It's intriguing to the students, and I'll do videos that are very short, 3 minutes or less, just on one particular concept. The concepts I have chosen are concepts that come up time after time again in office hours or student questions. So it allows the students to go to those topics that I know and that have shown to be difficult, and they can access them anytime at home. So they can't make it to office hours, or they don't feel comfortable, they have anxiety about one-on-one meetings. They have those resources for them at home. And again, they're about the attention span of a student. So 3 minutes or less. The other thing I have done is that I continue to use the HiFlex format. So I always run a live Zoom during my class period. I tell my students, it is not going to be pretty. It is not going to be professional. I'm going to be moving around because my priority is teaching in-person students. But they can hear my voice, and the PowerPoint lectures are posted online. So you can still get all the material. You can log into the Zoom real time if you can't make it to class, or you can watch it recorded. It provides the accessibility to students that are sick and are afraid to miss class. I have a lot of students with anxiety, family issues, so they're not missing it. They can either, again, do it live, or they can do the recording. And some students just will come to class and then use the recording as well. So it's not anything harder for me. Again, it's just not a very professional, high grade video, and they understand that going in, but they have really appreciated having that flexibility. And I appreciate not having to deal with all the absences and weather delays and whatever else issues are going on, is that the material is there. You access it however you need to access it.
The semester rarely goes as planned for you or your students. Jennifer's Lightboard and HiFlex setup means nobody has to fall behind just because life decided to throw a Tuesday curveball. When we're talking about accessibility, the details matter. Dr. Derek Harmon, Associate Professor in the Department of Biomedical Education and Anatomy at The Ohio State University College of Medicine, shows how small design choices in your materials can make a big difference. Tip 9. The details are in the design, so sweat the small stuff.
Ohio State has, I think, been really on top of the accessibility requirements for us as faculty. So we still, utilize PowerPoint heavily. So every single image and box that's any PowerPoint slide, we have to explain what it is. So as you might imagine, me as an anatomist, I am very visual heavy. I use a lot of images, a lot of models. So we had to go through and explain not just that this is an image of the muscles of the thigh or something like that. We had to lay out all the muscles listed that were labeled, what the perspective was, it from the front, from the side, from the back. And so, I might have a set of slides for one lecture that's 80 to 100 slides. That's a lot of alt text that we're writing. It's a minor thing, but you think about, potential red-green color blindness. So I use purple arrows because I think a standard, but a lot of people use red arrows or something. It's a very small thing, but that adds up. And so that means that anything that I want to draw attention to for my students, I use purple arrows, purple boxes, things that I think for the majority of individuals that might have a color blindness, which is typically red or green, that I might make it a little bit more accessible for them in that way.
Derek's approach is like being a translator between visual and verbal languages. His willingness to write detailed alt text for up to 100 slide lectures shows how real inclusion requires more than just good intentions. Because accessibility isn't only about the big gestures. It's also in the color of the arrow on the slide that lets everyone see exactly what you're pointing at. And now, our final tip. Accessibility doesn't mean having every tool or every skill in your own toolkit. And Dr. Amy Goodman, senior lecturer in the mathematics department, knows that. She leans on Baylor's built-in LMS features, campus accommodation services, and a strong network of colleagues to make sure her students can access the right supports.
I think that's a huge
issue for our students, making education accessible to all. Having said that, aside from a rudimentary background in universal design, I'm fortunate at Baylor that we use Canvas as our learning management system. And so it has a lot of features that are already part of that. For example, it automatically generates captions for videos and things or creates downloadable transcripts of videos that students can read along with or read separately from the video to get some feedback. We also have an Office of Access Learning Accommodation that can make things available to students to support their learning if they are learning other able. So I had a blind student a few years ago, and he had a real problem being able to read graphs, as one might imagine. And so our Office of Learning Accommodation had a tactile grapher where they could take a picture that I had supplied or that the textbook had supplied and turn it into something tactile. The student could feel the shape of the curve, could feel where the axes were. Those are not necessarily tools that I personally have or can pull out of my toolbox at any given time. So I'm kind of blessed to have a lot of support at Baylor. And just generally, I just like to keep that line of communication open with my students. Are there any needs that you have that I can meet? And if so, what are they? And if they're not something that I can just make a small adjustment to meet in the classroom, then what can we do outside of the classroom to meet those needs? So I kind of let students tell me what they need and work to make that happen for them.
Amy didn't have the tools to help her visually impaired student read the graph, something critical in a math class. But she knew where she could go to get the resource to help the student feel the shape of the curve. She reminds us accessibility works best when it's a partnership between instructors, institutions, digital learning companies, and students. One that's built on listening, trust, and a willingness to figure it out together. So what did we learn today? Accessibility isn't just about removing barriers. It's about making sure the path was never blocked in the first place. From curb-cut metaphors to purple arrows, from lightboard videos to student hours, these educators are designing an open-door policy for learning that benefits everyone. If this episode gave you a few ideas for your own class, or just make you nod along while grading, pass it along to a colleague, leave us a review, or scroll down to the show notes to learn more about the educators we featured today. Go follow them, thank them, and totally steal their best ideas. And if you have an accessibility one of your own, be sure to leave us a voicemail with your tips at 512-765-4688. And you might just hear yourself on a future episode, because, as they say, sharing is caring. And in the end, the best classrooms aren't obstacle courses, they're open invitations. Until next time, I'm Marissa Bluestone, and this is the What and Who of EDU.